In the last half-century, Britain has been transformed. There's been an explosion of choice, which has changed our way of life completely. Last week, we saw how the 60s broke with the past. Now, we bring the story up to date. We'll see how the last 2 decades changed the lives of 3 real families. They started our series with very different backgrounds. But now they're about to experience an era which led to more social mobility than ever before and broke down the old class barriers between them. The times they have lived in have shaped us all. "1977 was a crucial year for the Corbett family. A new head of the family was installed. Johnny Corbett took charge of Rowallan Castle in Ayrshire in Scotland. In the 40s and 50s, the Corbetts had been a rich aristocratic clan. And Johnny had been brought up with a sense of his own destiny.
It wasn't like you sat in a schoolroom and it was drilled to you. You will one day be Lord Rowallan and you will behave like this and you will do that. It wasn't that. It was much more just natural. You just learnt it by watching and learning by example of what was expected of you. My grandfather being Governor-General of the state of Tasmania in Australia, one learnt an enormous amount about protocol. We certainly had members of the royal family coming to stay. But to me it didn't feel as if one was being snobbish. One didn't feel as if it was anything other than normal, because that is what I'd been brought up. It was just exactly the same as anybody else going along to meet their friends in the pub in the evening.
Johnny inherited the estate when he was only 30. He did so because the rightful heir, his father Arthur, had been disinherited after he ran off with a transsexual. By the 70s, Arthur was in exile in Spain, where he was to end his days working as a barman. By now, the Corbetts' wealth had declined. And what was worse, when Johnny's grandfather died, he had divided up most of the family's liquid cash among all his children and grandchildren. This meant that from now on, Johnny was going to have to struggle to stop the estate going bankrupt. For the Ashworth family too, 1977 was a watershed. They're a family of doctors and teachers who live in Didsbury in Manchester. In the 40s, Henry and Betty had witnessed the founding of the NHS, and their fortunes had risen with the growth of the welfare state.
This was going to be a new world with new houses and a socialist philosophy. And we believed this.
By 1977, their daughter Janet was a teacher, and son Mark was finishing his medical training. He and his wife Liz were also about to start a family of their own.
I knew that he wanted children, and I kept saying, no, don't want to. You know, I've got my career here and quite happy, thank you. And then suddenly it dawned on me that we were getting older and everybody else was having children, and that this point would come when we hadn't got anybody else. So I decided to stop taking the pill and forgot to tell him. I thought, well, you know, I'll come off the pill and it'll take 6 months probably before anything happens, or within 6 weeks I was expecting Simon.
The next generation of Ashworths would soon be on the way. But for Mark and Liz, the future was going to bring heartache as well. Our third family are the Beardsalls. They're from the East End of London. In the 1940s, they'd been brought up in great poverty. Eldest sister is Dora Challingsworth. She's the matriarch of the family and has always been proud of her roots.
We was quite proud to be a working class family, to be honest. People get the wrong impression of EastEnders. I think people get the impression, oh, Cockneys, they're dirty, that's far from the truth. We didn't have a lot. I mean, you had a wooden table. We didn't have an highly polished table like some of the middle class or upper class had, but that table was scrubbed.
By the 70s, Dora was a leading figure in her trade union, representing women at the giant Ford plant in Dagenham.
The management knew that I had respect from the shop floor, so they knew that I could be backed at any time. I'd only have to call for my backing and I would get it. So they knew, like, how far to go, really.
As a shop steward, Dora was soon to be thrust into the limelight. But her most bitter dispute was to be as a mother. For in time, the question of class was to divide her family. For Britain as a whole, it looked at first as if the decade might end on a high. The climax of 1977 was an old-fashioned celebration of national unity, as the country marked the Queen's Silver Jubilee.
I was working in Ford at the time as a sewing machinist, and of course the Jubilee was coming up and everyone had to dress up, and so we all got together and said, right, we'll have a hat competition. So we all had to make our hats, and we had garters on as well. We made our garters, and the manager got to hear about it, and he bought a car around, a brand new car, for us to all sit on and pose on for photos. So he wanted us to walk down a ramp like models, and we said, no, we draw the line to that, you know. Oh, we did have a laugh. And that's what it's all about, working with about 400 women.
We had a family party, just for a change, at our house. After it's spilled out onto the street.
We had a street
We
party.
had a street party. We put trestle tables all the way down the street. And I remember Simon was dressed in red, white and blue. We all tried to wear red, white and blue. He liked hats, so I think he had a
Union Jack hat on.
hat on.
But the mood of national unity was soon under threat. Within a year, a series of disastrous strikes brought Britain to its knees. Rubbish piled up in the streets. Even the grave diggers went on strike. A sense of crisis engulfed the country.
We were brought up to think that, you know, trades unions really did do an awful lot of good for the workers, which indeed they did, but they got too big for the boots. And of course they killed the goose that laid the golden egg.
I seem to remember as a medical student sort of helping push patients down corridors and things like that.
Industrial anarchy seemed to be arising. We had strikes on the railways.
Well, there were
In
strikes
fact,
everywhere.
we were really looking for somebody who'd instill some discipline into the workers of the world.
The country soon found someone. In 1979, the leader of the Conservatives, Margaret Thatcher, was elected, and she said she could sort out Britain.
Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith.
Maggie Thatcher came into power, and she seemed to be the woman who was going to tame the unions. And even I, with all my principles, felt that she was a dose of the right medicine for a time.
The Conservatives began the 1980s with a deliberate attempt to encourage enterprise. With a great deal of hype, a series of nationalized industries were privatized. Between the selling of these shares and council houses, millions of people suddenly had real capital for the first time. The most unlikely people were caught up in the enthusiasm.
I didn't tell no one about that. I mean, we just took shares out and like the gas shares and things like that, but that was looked down on. But I never told them. I just did it and mind my own business, mind your own sort of thing, you know. When they started selling council property, obviously the union didn't believe in all this, but if you've got a choice of buying your home or staying there renting it and bettering yourself by buying it, then okay, we're going to do that. I mean, when I went to the union meetings and told them I'm buying my house, oh, that was terrible. But a lot's done it since.
Looking after number one became the creed of the 80s. And when Dora's daughter Tracy left school, she too set out to do exactly that.
I can't say that the school actually recommended anything particular, and you know, my mum was in Fords, and that was a possibility, I suppose, but you never want to end up where your parents are.
Tracy found work as a typist in a bank in the very heart of the financial markets, the City of London. And here she discovered a whole new world.
The people up there just seem to have a lot more quality. People used to say they're going to quite exotic places for their holidays and always going out for meals. It was just going out for dinner tomorrow night, and that sounds different to going down the pub on a Friday night and playing pool and going home. You taste these fine wines and this lovely food, and it's all, you know, nouveau cuisine food all decorated, and it's like, wow.
Tracy had arrived at just the right time, for the financial markets were booming, and for young and ambitious people there were plenty of opportunities. She became a dealer, and married one too.
The city was on a high, everyone, you know, everywhere was making money. You know, all the corporate events were like big, and you know, one company did this, another company would do it bigger and better. The magic days really, where everybody remembers just being able to enjoy it. And people, you know, headhunted and, you know, paid more money, and it's like, wow, you know, this is just never going to end.
She was changing her voice a little bit, you know, but she had a phone voice. Because quite often I've rung and she's, oh, I say, good crikey, you're posh, and you know.
Tracy was leaving her roots behind. And this was to cause tension in the future. But just as one family was moving up in the world, another was facing the prospect of moving down. At the beginning of the decade, Johnny Corbett was beginning to realize what he had taken on. The castle was turning out to be a burden.
It was extremely expensive to heat. The heating system was very young. And it was extremely expensive to keep clean, as far as you need an army of people to keep it clean. I simply had not got the money coming in to be able to afford to do that. So there was a gradual decline from when my grandfather died in 1977, when there were 25 staff, down to, in the early 80s, down to as few as half a dozen.
But on the horizon, an even bigger problem loomed. The Inland Revenue was starting to calculate how much tax Johnny owed on his inheritance.
I'm sitting in the castle now beginning to wonder about death duties and how they're going to affect the estate. It was becoming very obvious to us all that when death duties did come, there was going to be a considerable problem. It was a nightmare situation. My grandfather obviously had not foreseen this. I mean, all his life, he'd never really had a financial problem. He'd been able to live his life without really having to worry about where the next pound was coming from. However, I was determined I wasn't going to lose it, so I worked very, very hard to keep the whole thing together.
Johnny's aunt, Fiona, had recently remarried and was now living in England. She had fallen out with Johnny years before. Like the rest of the older Corbett family, she wasn't optimistic about his chances.
We were rather amazed that he wanted to battle on with it, because we sort of thought it was, you know, a surmountable task, really. I think, you know, and I think in a funny way. I mean, I know one ought to be sort of very supportive and very everything else for having done, but I think we had it all sort of inevitable in our minds that it just wasn't viable. We all sort of knew that it wasn't going to work. It was only a question of time before Johnny would have to move out.
Mark Ashworth's big passion is racing classic cars. His rival is his cousin, John Hewitt. They were brought up together almost as brothers.
John and I have played together since we were children, and grew up at weekends and holidays together a lot. We developed a mutual interest in cars.
In the audience is John's wife, Anita. By the 1980s, Britain had more mixed-race marriages than any other country in Europe. When John and Anita started dating, everyone was a little wary.
Obviously, Anita was really quite different in appearance to other people that I'd gone out with and things, but her outlook is genuinely very similar to the outlook of the family.
I mean, I think anybody that knows the family will tell you that they're a very, very tight-knit family, which is very, very nice if you're a family member. But if you to join that family, it's very, very hard. It probably was a shock to them because they didn't know any other mixed couples.
With some trepidation, I think, he first of all brought her around to Mark and Liz and to me to see how we got on with it, because he was very wary of the reaction of the family.
It was a while before Mark's grandma was told about it. John used to turn up on his own, even when he was seeing Anita, because he didn't feel that old Gran would accept it.
But Grandma, strangely enough, was an absolute gem and thought Anita was wonderful and thoroughly approved of her. So all this ambivalence about introducing them was totally unnecessary. And Anita's absolutely super, and she's been really great for John and looks after him very well, and we all just consider her as one of the family now.
21 years later, I think I've got through the barrier.
You've got in there.
Will you love her, comfort her, honour and protect her, and forsaking all others, be faithful to her as long as you both shall live?
I will.
As a shop steward at Ford's in Dagenham, Dora had become embroiled in a long-standing battle for women's rights, which had been raging at the plant. By the middle of the 1980s, there had been legislation on equal pay for over a decade. But employers like Ford's were using a loophole to get around it. They simply designated women's work as unskilled, and so paid them less than men.
Being a machinist, it's a skilled trade, so we wanted to be amongst the skilled workers. But Ford's wouldn't recognise that the women were skilled, and yet they wanted skilled machinists. When they advertised for skilled machinists, and that's why the women fought. You weren't only fighting Ford's for recognition, you was fighting the cutters, like the men. They didn't want women to get equal pay with them. And also a lot of the union people. There was a AU guy, Jimmy Early, called us a load of bananas. A lot of the men used to shout us down, a lot of men. Even when you're marching, you had men shouting you down. You don't realise how many chauvinistic men there are around. But no, the women was determined. It was a good spirit. Everyone was together.
After over a decade of strikes and protests, a tribunal was asked to rule in 1985.
Can you tell me how you found out about the news?
We was up in the manager's office this morning. Well, we had orders to go up there at 9:30 for the phone call to come through. We went up there and sat there till nearly 10:10 when the news come through, and it was really great. Oh, we had a lovely party over there. Really good. The atmosphere was really great, and it was really nice. But they'd fought a long while for that. And, you know, the fact that we won it, being women, only women, you know, and we won it.
The Haywood and Dagenham Girls Strikers.
Quite surprised to see her on the telly. So, well, I was proud. And I knew her dad had been proud that he'd been alive to see it. Yeah, I thought it was great. You know, good girl. That's my sis.
As the 80s came to a close, the Corbetts' problems were reaching a climax. After years of prevarication, the Inland Revenue had finally calculated Johnny's tax bill. And this coincided with problems in his personal life. He was divorced by his wife, and she went to the newspapers. But his next marriage was even more turbulent, and his second wife left him for a show jumper.
One of the big problems I had during the course of the 80s was that my second marriage never really took off as a marriage should. We never really worked as one unit to secure the future of Rowan or secure the future really of anything. At roughly the same time as my second marriage failed, the tax bill came in, and between those two traumas, really the whole thing just became too much to cope with, and I just thought, well, there is only one option. And so I took the decision that I would sell the house. With retrospect, I would have kept a lot of things that I let go. But at the time, everything was just so topsy-turvy in my life that I really wasn't in control in the way I would have liked to be.
Well, this is the drawing room. The auction took place actually in this room. This again was only used really for moments when guests came. It was very seldom used by the family as such. There was a wonderful fireplace there which gave out a tremendous amount of heat. And over here was the piano which the family would quite often gather around for a little sing-song on. And those shelves there were filled with the most wonderful china which got sold. The auction was very full. There were a lot of people here, a lot who were just nosy parkers, frankly, wanted to see what was happening and really wanted to have a look around the house and see if they could get something cheap. But like a lot of good house auctions, actually prices are pumped up quite a lot by people who just want a memento.
To me, it was just heartbreaking watching all these things that you had grown up with and loved, going under the hammer, not being able to afford to buy half of them back. I think possibly it would have been better if we'd been offered some things, prior to the sale at a proper valuation as a family, but we weren't. So I know some of Johnny's sisters were a bit upset about that, but because there were one or two things they wanted, but that didn't come into it. I mean, it's a difficult thing, that, because obviously you don't know how much things are going to make at auction, and then you suddenly find you've given your dreaded Aunt Fiona something for X thousand when you might have got, twice the price.
I wouldn't like to go through it again. I was, after all, or should have, after all, only been a custodian of the chattels, the family chattels, for the period of time when I was Lord Rowland. And here was I actually selling them.
He might have lost a fortune, but later there was to be a silver lining for Johnny. By the end of the 1980s, Mark and Liz Ashworth's family were growing up and had started school. But just when it seemed as if everything was going so well, things took a dreadful turn. For a family of medics, there was a terrible irony when they were struck by the disease which has become our modern epidemic.
I found this swelling. We went on holiday very soon after that, and Mark was obviously very aware of this lump, which was visible by then. It was the size of a Brazil nut, if you like.
Because she was very thin.
So as soon as we got back from holiday, I went to see the doctor the next day, on my own, quite happily, not thinking there was anything untoward. And he didn't seem to think there was anything untoward either, and did a biopsy on it and said, don't think there's anything to worry about, go away, come back in 4 weeks and we'll see if it's changed. So I didn't worry about it, but you did, I think, and your father was very upset about it. And I went back in 4 weeks and they said, we think it's all right, so we'll just take it out under a local anaesthetic.
But during the operation, the surgeon realized things were more serious than they'd all imagined.
He told me that it was malignant and that I would have to go back for more surgery. I remember saying, I don't know how I'm going to tell Mark. How am I going to tell Mark? So I said to him, would you mind speaking to Mark as well? You've told me an awful lot of things. As far as I'm concerned, you can do what you like. Just get me better, because my daughter is only 10, my son is 11.
I was completely devastated by it. But I had to carry on working and things, and I couldn't just sort of stop, going into practice, and it was really very hard, very hard.
As far as I was concerned, I was always going to get better. Whereas I didn't think you felt that, did you?
No. Both father and I, of course, see what goes wrong with women that get breast cancer, and, I just, all I could see was blackness. Yeah, it was very hard.
Well, I think there were sort of 3 sessions, weren't there? In hospital, and removal of one breast, and then there was a period of a few years, and we thought all was well, and then it was in another primary growth. Like the sword of Damocles, it's there always. All right, when's it going to flare up again next time, and where? And hopefully you hope it won't. But you have to accept the fact that maybe it will.
Yes, you don't talk about cure, you talk about control.
Remission.
Remission.
For Tracy, the 80s had been a roller coaster. After the boom, there was a recession of financial markets.
The city changed and everything seemed to blow up. So much more was expected of you. Longer hours, more commitment but for less money, and when lots of people were losing their jobs and maybe being made redundant.
The extra stress contributed to the failure of Tracy's marriage. So at the beginning of the 90s, when she decided to wed for a second time, she wanted everything to go right.
The wedding was a lovely occasion. We had a marquee around at my in-laws' house. They were quite thrilled that it was all happening and sort of, organised the whole event, which was fine by me.
When Tracy got married, I felt I was being left out because everything was being done over there, and particularly that it was in his house, like marquee in the garden, and I felt, no, it wasn't my daughter. I was getting left out of it because the first wedding I made all the bridesmaids' dresses and everything, and so I was in there, but this one I felt I was being shut out of.
I did realise that they felt uncomfortable, but there was nothing much more I could do other than include them in everything I could and try and encourage them.
Second syllable sounds like...
Rodney!
Yes!
Hello, Bob, all right.
They had this problem of, the class thing, I suppose. They thought they were just different.
They seemed a bit over the top to me, Russell's family. They're nice people. When you get to know them, they're nice people, but that first impression was looking down at me, like, from where you come from. And I just got that impression, and nothing could stop that on that day. On that wedding day, it was awful.
There isn't anything you can do about it. What's going to happen is going to happen, and you can't spoil the day worrying about it.
It all went off really nice at the church, but still feeling lonely, still feeling I didn't belong on that day.
I just thought I'd take this chance to wish Tracy and Russell all the best and happy marriage. I thank you all for coming here today. I hope you enjoy yourself. Cheers.
My husband had quite a bit to drink because it was all done. And it was in a marquee, and the floor wasn't very level anyway. And he sat on the chair and it fell over. Everything went off really well until that actual time that he sat on the chair and the chair fell over. And then Tracy came over and said, take Dad out, he's drunk. I mean, he wasn't drunk, he'd had a drink, of course he'd had a drink, but it was uneven, that floor. And of course, that was all, as I say, they all clapped, way, let's replay. Oh, that didn't go down very well, did it? Tracy came over and said to me, can you get Daddy out of here because he's showing me up? Well, I just had to go.
Well, my dad was actually just drinking too much and was like, fell off his chair. But I mean, so that's because he was drinking, and then it was like, I complained because he had to show me up by doing this. But which, even at an old East End wedding, I think they would have felt the same way. It's just because it's your special day, you don't want, something like that to happen.
I didn't class them as no better than me. They was his parents. They might have more money than I've got. They've got a bigger house than I've got. But I'm still a mother, whatever, And I don't know why you can be ashamed of your parents. I mean, I would never be ashamed of my parents. I've never ignored my daughter. Let's put it like that, and I did. When I went back to the party, I just ignored her. They went on their honeymoon and I didn't go and see them off or anything.
By the 1990s, our three families had lived through enormous changes. But before they reached the present day, each of their stories was to have one final surprise. For Dora, the 90s were the culmination of what had been nothing short of a revolution in her life. "55 years ago, when she was a kid, the most Dora could hope for was to be a full-time housewife. Like her mother, she assumed she would have little choice but to go on and have a large family. It would have been unthinkable that she would have a responsible role and fight a major corporation through the courts. The idea that she would take holidays abroad or own her own home would have seemed absurd, as would the idea that she would argue with her own daughter over the issue of class. On her honeymoon, Tracy got a phone call from her mum.
They don't think about calling abroad. It's not the sort of thing she would normally have done, so I knew that it was like such a big thing for her to do, to pick up the phone and ring. Especially the fact that I wasn't here, she had to make the effort to get the number about where I was staying. She had to ring Russell's mum and get the number and everything, and ring me, but she didn't care that she had to speak to her. She wanted to get to me, which meant everything to me, because I knew that, you know, she was out to reconcile it.
And then she sort of came round talking to me then, like, oh, she was sorry. But you've got to stop and think what you're doing. You can be very hurtful to people. She was under pressure at the time of the wedding, and everything had to be done properly, and, you know, I think she was under a lot of pressure, and I think that's why that all built up into that. We'd never fall out. Me and my daughters, I know. I don't care who they were or what they did, they wouldn't make me fall out with my daughters.
You've only got to hear their voice, and it's emotional, and to hear my mum's voice especially, that's it, that just sets me off. And happy to say we all made it up with tears and sorries, and back together again as a family.
Tracy's now a working mother herself and has to juggle home and her job in a merchant bank. Her shift starts at 4 o'clock in the morning.
I do international settlements for Tokyo, Hong Kong and Sydney, so it involves sort of 20 hours, early hours. My normal day, I get up around 3:15, go to work for 4 o'clock, stay and work generally until 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, come home, go down to the gym occasionally when I get the time, and then go around and pick the children up. I've decided to send them to private school. It's a big responsibility to take on, but I think it's very important these days, and I'm willing to work to pay for that.
I do worry. I do worry about the big house and the mortgages and like the private education, and but it doesn't worry her. It doesn't worry them at all. I mean, they'll get there. Russell works really hard, she works really hard, but I'd like to see them get there a bit easier than they're rushing around they're doing at the moment.
Go on then.
I love to hear my grandchildren talk nice, because they really do. I mean, they tell me. I say, oh no, look, Nanny speaks how Nanny speaks, but you speak how Mummy tells you. You've got to pronounce your words. Nanny hasn't, I'm too old now.
The values my parents set, I mean, they're the things you don't ever want to forget. They're good old, East End traditions and things. I mean, they're just very solid, and they're the values that you want to take forward with you to your children.
As the old working class changes, the ranks of the middle class have grown. Families like the Ashworths now make up over half the population, and they are now more prosperous and secure than ever before. At the beginning of the 90s, after a long career, Henry retired as a doctor. With such a close family that he and Betty moved in next door to their son, Mark, a decision that was to save Henry's life.
We'd been to Cyprus on holiday last October. Mm-hmm. And we came home. It had been dreadfully hot. Mm-hmm. I went to bed that night, and at 4 o'clock in the morning I wanted to have a pee. I went to the toilet and I came back and I couldn't breathe. And after half a minute I said to Betty, You'll have to get Mark.
Phone rang. Mark, come round, your dad can't breathe. Oh dear. So we're next door in my pyjamas, and there he's sitting on the side of the bed in really quite a bad way. He was in quite gross heart failure, so he was on the phone, get the ambulance.
And I suffered the indignity of being put in one of these transporting chairs and trussed up like a turkey cock and carried downstairs. And my breathing got worse and worse, and they put me in the ambulance outside and they wired me up. And I couldn't breathe at all. In fact, I became unconscious.
They whizzed him into hospital immediately, and essentially I think he basically had a cardiac arrest on the way in to hospital.
I could see that they were getting more and more despondent and they couldn't get any response from him. So in desperation I said to the doctor, let me have a go. So they looked at me, you know, a bit of tremor, and they said, well, if you're sure it's all right. So I said yes, and patted his face. Henry, come on, waken up.
And I've heard that voice for 53 years. And I thought I'd better do something. So I opened one eye and I shut it quick in case she wanted me to lay the table or empty the washing machine. And I went unconscious again, but they pushed me up to the ward, and the next thing I remember was what looked like white vapour coming round my neck, and I thought, dear God, we're stuck in the fires of California. These are the fumes of the... And it was a vapour coming out of a nebulizer that they were giving me to help me breathing, you know. But from then I began to recover.
For Janet, the 90s have meant a new beginning. Once her daughter left home, she decided to separate from her husband and re-evaluate her life. She's recently become a devout Christian.
I'm really not materialistic. That's a great difference between Mark and I, and indeed between me and the rest of the family. And I think my father finds this a bit of a mystery. He can't really understand why I don't have this burning ambition to earn lots of money. And that isn't what I want out of life at all. I'm really concentrating on maintaining my equilibrium and inner calm, and developing a much more calm and unstressed lifestyle.
As for Mark and Liz, they continue to cope with the ups and downs of living with cancer. So far, things are going well.
It's there, I take a tablet every day, but I don't think about it. I just enjoy life and don't let the little things worry me or get me down, which I think you do.
Yeah, sometimes I get things out of proportion.
I think you do.
I get told off for doing that.
Kicking the shins.
It's their kids, Helen and Simon, who will be the beneficiaries of all the profound changes of the last half-century. Their generation will have more opportunities than any other in our history.
We have to sit back and let the youngsters take over. And if they have as much pleasure out of it as we've done, and as much excitement as we've done, and they've lived such
We're the survivors, if they can survive.
Lived such a full life as we've done, they'll do all right, Jack.
This is what Betty says about the younger generation. She envies them their exuberance for life.
The only thing I really do envy them is their exuberance for life. You know, this fizz of youth.
Burning the candle at both ends,
Yes,
you mean?
yes, it gives a lovely life.
Yes.
As the middle class grows and the working class come up in the world, it's the old world of the aristocracy which has been undermined. In the 1940s, the Corbett family took their status at the top of the social order for granted. But by the 90s, most of their wealth had gone, and with it their way of life. Johnny now lives on a farm, on what was once his vast estate. Now he's a small businessman, running a show-jumping school with his third wife, Claire.
I moved into a house that was one of my farms on the estate and converted that into a very comfortable, very nice house. And eventually found a fantastic soulmate to live in it with me.
When we first got together, he'd actually lost a lot of his confidence. He'd had so many sort of kicks in the teeth with one thing and another. He would run around in circles wearing himself out. Whereas now, we work together and we channel everything into achieving things. And each year, I have a plan. I mean, I usually look at it and say, right, this year we will achieve X, Y, Z. And when it gets to the end of the year, I'm thrilled if we've got half of it done.
But though the family's decline could have left Johnny bitter, it hasn't.
Not going to finish the course. 7, 8, and 9. He's eliminated. Eliminated. You don't clap halfway round.
I have got 4 lovely children, 2 out of each marriage. Claire has got 2 lovely children who are my stepchildren. And I don't think anybody could ask for much more, really. I mean, I can, in all honesty, say I'm happier today than I've ever been in my entire life. Things are looking much rosier than they ever have done before, and I'm a lucky man. It took me a few years to get that luck, but I'm a lucky man, and I'm quite happy with what life has now offered me.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
And in the modern world, the aristocracy must pay its way like the rest of us. Johnny's son works for a living. The future Lord Rowallan is an estate agent in London. And what of Rowallan Castle? It was sold to a developer, but for now lies empty.
It's come to rather a sad end. Rowallan now all boarded up, and you can't get up the drive because the gates are permanently locked. In fact, the other day I took my son, who'd never seen Rowallan, my son who's now 18, and we had to sort of climb over a gate up round the stables and walk down, and just saw it all sort of shut up. And I don't think he could visualise what it'd been like to live there. I'd given him this great hype about this fantastic house, and we looked into the windows and everything was sort of shuttered and boarded up. The old tennis court was full of weeds, and it was just very sad to see that, the place that you remember as being sort of fantastic, was all becoming rather tumbled down, really. The drive was full of potholes because that was very much something that my parents liked to keep, quite nicely tarmacked. It was just very tragic, but I think this happens so often when, family dynasties come to an end.
Tomorrow night, the final documentary in the series examining Britain's sex industry, Vice, Inside Britain's Sex Business, here on Carlton tomorrow night at 10:20.